Hi, this is the Module 1 review. So in case you weren't able to come to the Module 1 lab, I'm just going to quickly go through some of the highlights of what we covered in class. So we are looking at Apple stock from the year 2006 to 2011, and I've given you the price from the stock exchange for each of those 6 years. And what we want to do is take a look and analyze that data and put it into a chart. So I'm going to go over to Excel, and I'm going to calculate what the rate of return was for each of those years. So from 2007 to 2006, the price of Apple stock went from $59.77 up to $121. So what we want to do is figure out what the multiplier is for that year. And the rate of return is always equal to the multiplier minus 1. Okay, now for both of these, we've got way too many decimal places. And the rate of return should be a percentage, so I'm going to change that to percent, and maybe I'll add a couple of decimals, maybe 1 decimal, and the multiplier here I'm only going to show, to about 4 decimal places, maybe 5. Okay, now I could go in and I could type in the exact same formula for 2008 all the way down. But one of the nice things with Excel is that you can copy the formula down just by selecting the cell that has the formula in it that you want to copy and hovering your cursor over that bottom right box until it turns to a cross, and then you can just drag it all the way down. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the rate of return. Notice that it actually copied the format of the cell as well. So if you format your cell before you copy it all down, then it does it for you. All right, so we can see that our rate of return altered between, well, it was 102 high down to a loss one year of 28%. The second part of the question said, what is the overall 5-year rate of return? So in this case, I'm not even worried about any of these intermediate prices. I just want to know what's the multiplier I need in order to get 59.77 up to 337. So I'm going to take that C9 and I'm going to divide it by C4. So my multiplier is 5.65, let's say. So the next question said, what is the 5-year rate of return? And that one's easy because it's just the multiplier minus 1. And I want to change this to a percent, and I'm going to add 1 decimal to it there. So 464% was the 5-year rate of return. The next part said, what is the average annual rate of return? So what we saw in the last video is I was asking you what is the average annual rate of return, and we don't want the arithmetic average. We don't want to just take the 464 divided by 5, because what we are really asking is, what number do I have to multiply 59.77 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a row, so that at the end I have $337.41. So what we saw is that the average annual rate of return uses the square root or the root function. So I want to know what number multiplied by itself 5 times is the same as multiplying once by 5.65. And so I want the 5th root of 5.65. So I'm going to say it's equal to cell E10 raised to the power of, and if you remember back to math, to do the 5th root, it's raised to the exponent 1/5, and that's the same thing. And because we want rate of return, we don't want multiplier, we're going to subtract 1, and then we'll have to change the format to be a percentage. There we go. So about 41% each year. And what I'm going to do is I just want to check, just so that you can see here. So my check is going to say, okay, if I start off with 59.77 and I multiply it by this 41%, but we have to put the 1 in front because we're adding 41% each year. So 1 plus 41.4. And how many times do I have to multiply that 1.41 by 59.77? Well, I'm going to multiply it by 1.41 here, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So raised to the power of 5. And you'll see that I get 337 and 41 cents, which is exactly what we achieved in 2011. So we've done our calculations correctly there. Now, what we also learned in the lab is that we have various different formulas that we can use. So the one formula I want to show you is one that we probably won't get a chance to use too often, but anytime you use a formula, you have to start it off with an equal sign. The formula that we're looking at here is the geometric mean. So remember I said we don't want the arithmetic mean of this 464%. We want to be actually calculating the geometric mean. So what we want is the geometric mean of these numbers. So if I were to multiply 2.02 times 1.55 times 0.71 times 1.89 times 1.31, I'll get 5.65. But I want to have one identical number that I multiply by itself 5 times and to be able to achieve that multiplier of 5.65. So I'm going to put in here equals geomean, and as soon as you start typing the name of the function, it'll pop up. I'm going to double click, and I want the geomean of these 5 numbers. Okay, and we can see that the geomean is this 1.414. So if I actually wanted the rate of return, I just subtract 1 from it, and I would get the average annual rate of return. So we can see the geomean function is useful for when you're doing the average of the average annual rate of return. Let's go over and take a look at a couple of the other functions we saw in class. Other functions that you can think of: minimum, maximum. I also said sometimes we would want to know what the sum of a bunch of numbers is. So there's a sum function. I'm just going to show you these 3 right now. So equals, and in this case it's just the min function, and you can see up here in the formula bar is that it starts off with the min function up here. I can either double click on that function, or if I open it up with a parenthesis, then I can put my range of cells, the address. So I want the minimum value from cell E5 down to E9. Close it, hit enter, and you'll see that we've got dollars here. I'm going to change this to %, add another decimal here, and so we can see that the maximum or the minimum average annual rate or minimum annual rate of return is minus 28%. The maximum, do the same thing with these 5 cells. Close the bracket and hit enter, and it will tell you, once we change it to the right format, that the maximum is 102.8. Now I'm going to ask here, we're just going to use the function, even though it doesn't have any meaning in any financial meaning, this arithmetic average of the 5-year rate of return. So I just want the arithmetic average, so I'm going to type in, now it's not mean, it is average. Okay, so equals average. I can double click, highlight that range of cells, close it, and I'm going to change again the format. There we go, and we can see that the average rate of return for, if we were to just take the average of these numbers, is 50.2. But if I were to ever ask you what the average rate of return was for the 5 years, I'd be very clear about it. And what we would be looking for is that average annual rate of return, and you'd have to do the geomean. okay, but that's fairly complex. One of the things I wanted to show you is, let's say I highlight this range of cells here. For some reason, I wanted to know what was the average price over the 5 years. So I can, if I highlight these cells, I could down here say, you know, average stock price. And if I want to put the average stock price, I could, you know, equals average. Highlight that and enter. Now, I might want to do it rather quickly, or I might not want to actually put a formula in the cell. I just want to highlight a range of cells and figure out what the sum of those, or the average of those cells are. Take a look down in the bottom right, and I'm going to change the magnification here. Take a look down once I highlight these cells. Down here on the bottom, I have the average, the count, and the sum. So that's a pretty good trick. Like if you don't want to be actually entering in a formula, just highlight the range of cells and you can go down here and you can see right away that the average is listed there for you. If I highlight all of them, I get the average of 183.30, which is the same value that I calculated in this cell. Another way to calculate the average, we just to show you one more function, I'll enter in sum. So I could take the sum of all of these numbers from 102 to 31.3, so E5 to E9. And I've got 5 numbers there, so if I want to take the average, I'd have to divide by 5. And I would get the same number, that 50.2. Change it to percentage. Now the only thing is, in this formula, I've entered an actual number in here, 5. I've had to manually go in and count it. You could get Excel to count it by using the count function. And I'm going to just say count the number of cells that are in that range. And you can see it counts that there's 5. If I were to highlight all of these, you can see down here it counts it as well. So if you were to take the sum divided by the count, you'll get the average. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a column here. So I'm going to click on column C, right click, and I'm going to say insert. And you can see right away here that anytime you see all of these pound symbols, it just means that whatever you're trying to fit into that cell isn't fitting, and so it can't squish it anymore, so it just puts those pound symbols, the hashtags. What you want to do is you want to go back and you just need to reduce the number of, there we go. For some reason it was a ridiculous number of decimals. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put here exchange, perhaps where we purchased the stock or where we grabbed the price. I'm not going to type TSE all the way down. I'm just going to drag that down. I can double click on the lines in between and you can see that it'll make it the appropriate width. So everything fits in. There we go. Excellent. So I'm going to actually make this a little bit smaller because it'll move to the left in column A there. All right. The last thing we did in class was to show you how to do a graph. And so we didn't have an extra column here, but I wanted to show you what you might want to do if you have more than just 2 columns of data. So I really want to just have a chart of the year and the price. So I'm going to highlight this entire range, year and price. Okay. And I'm going to say insert. I'm going to go over to charts. If we were to hover over, we've got here we got line charts. I'm going to do, usually what we do is a scatter anytime we want to do the relationship between X and Y. In this case, we have X and this is our Y, but I'm just going to go here and there. Okay. So I've got price. Along the bottom here, I have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which I may not necessarily be all that doesn't really help me in terms of labels for the x-axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I can either click on the chart, and if it's not already popping up, you go to the Design tab, and I'm going to select the data. And in this case, I've got price as the y-axis, which is what I want. And here I've got these x-axis labels, and they're not exactly what I want here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit, first of all, I'm going to edit the price. And when I click that, then it gives me all these different options for the X and Y, because with 3 columns here, it's confused. It doesn't know what do I want as X, what do I want as Y. So the series name is the price. That's correct. The X values that I want along the X axis here, I don't want 1 to 7. I want these years, 2006 to 2011. And the Y values, it's guessed correctly. I want 5977 to 337 here. Okay, so when you've created your chart, if it doesn't have the labels that you want along the bottom, or if the y-axis isn't showing the series that you want it to show, you can go into this select data and you can play around with it. I'm going to click OK. So now I have a chart that shows the price for years 2006 to 2011, but and I have here the price along the y-axis. Every time you make a chart, there are 3 things that you really need to look at. You need to take a look at the title, and you need to take a look at the labels along the X and Y axis, and you need to make sure that that you've got everything sitting sort of in the middle of your chart. So if you need to change the X or Y axis so that if you have all your data scrunched up in one little place, then what you want to do is you want to spread that out and alter your axes. The best way to play around with these is in Excel. It's really, well, the Microsoft version or the Windows version of Excel, if you click on the plus symbol, I can go here and you can see axis titles aren't included, but if I click on axis titles, it'll put them here. I'm going to now go up to the title, and I can just double click. I can change this, so I can say AAPL stock prices, and down here I'll just change the axis title to year, and on the y-axis I'm going to change it from a nondescript label to the price, and I want to also state what the units are. And so here I'll put Canadian dollars. Okay, so price, I'm going to put that in brackets, CAD. Okay. So now I've got a nice graph. I can size it however I want. I can move it around. And one of the things just to show you is, let's say for some, I'm going to go back here to the price, and let's say I change it from $59.77, and I made a mistake. I actually bought it for $95. So if I put 95 in there, watch the graph when I hit enter. you can see that the graph actually, it will alter with it. All the calculations that I've made all the way along here, they all get recalculated. And if I want to go back and just change it back to the original price, I can go up here to the top left and undo. And you can see that the graph goes back to the way it's supposed to be. One of the other things that you can do with the graphs is you can, if I go to design, I can actually change the chart type. So instead of it being an XY scatter plot, I can go here, I can go to, we can just do a line chart, which won't really change things too much at this point. I can go to a column chart. If I click on the column chart here, it'll change it there, but you can see that it's played around with my axes labels, so I don't really have it the way I want. Let's go back. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to change the chart type to just a basic column. When I hover over it, you can see that it actually gives you a preview, so that's what I want. I'm going to click OK. I can still go up to these various, these are just different formats of that chart. So I can change it to look like that or look like this. In general, you want just a nice, clean, simple chart. You don't want a lot of fancy graphics and a lot of different colors, because when you go to print it off or if you put it in a presentation, it can just be very distracting. But that looks pretty good right there. All right, so that is what we did in our class. The one thing that you might need to do for your, or you will need to do for your assignment, I'm going to just shade this in. So I'm just going to do what we did before, where I click Format Painter, and I'll paint that area there so it's shaded in like the rest of them. The one thing that you will need to do for your Tread Softly assignment is add a comment. So one of the things here is, let's say I want to add a comment to any one of these cells. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to add a comment here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say Insert Comment. It'll, if you've got your Microsoft options set up, your name goes in there. You can either delete it or you can keep it in there. I'm just going to say, this formula calculates the arithmetic mean as well, or with the sum formula, let's say, using the sum and count formulas. Okay, now when I hit enter, oops, there we go. You notice that when I click outside of the comment box, it disappears. When I hover over the cell, the comment will pop up. What you could do is, if you want that to always show, you can right click and say Show Comment, and then it always is there. And that's just a toggle. So I can say Hide Comment now, and it will only pop up when I hover over the cell. So that's sort of a neat feature. And the last thing is to add a text box. Sometimes they're handy if you wanted to add some sort of comments. So I'm going to say Insert, and I'm going to go over here to Text Box. So I'm going to add a text box, and I'm going to start in cell E15 and just highlight that. I think I'll have enough room here, and I'll say, this is all you need to finish assignment A. And I can, with that text box, I can center the text in the middle. I can resize the text box, and I can also change the color of the text if I want. And I can even change the background color. So if I just wanted it light blue, I can click there. Great. So that's all we did in Module 1, and you should be ready to start tackling Module 2 pre-work. Thanks.